Well, has anyone got a question? Maybe something you want to clarify from something I said? Something you've always wondered? Or maybe something I said has triggered something in your mind?
As we're getting more and more translations and revisions, can we be more comfortable with the more recent publications?
So the question is, as we have more and more translations and more up-to-date ones, can we be more comfortable with the more up-to-date translations? I would say it depends entirely on, well, it would be about case-by-case basis, because different translations attempt to do different things. So there's a Bible translation called The Message, and its aim is to make the Bible very understandable in quite simple English, and so it does a paraphrase rather than a literal translation. And as soon as you paraphrase, then the person writing it has to make decisions about what they think it means for you. So when you read The Message, you have to bear that in mind, that you're not reading a straight translation, you're reading somebody's thoughts. Where other more recent Bible translations, like the English Standard Version, has set out to try and be, as far as possible, a very literal interpretation of what the original text say. So when you read a Bible like that, you can actually be very confident that what you're written is a reasonably accurate translation of what the original text tells. And whenever they do a Bible translation, they always go back to the original text. So they're going back to archaeological manuscripts and fragments. They don't start with the authorized version and just change it into more modern English. So they always go back to the source anyway. Does that answer your question?
Thank you.
Anyone else have a question? Is that a question, Matt?
Yeah. So what would be the purpose of a paraphrase rather than a literal translation? Okay. Why do we have things like The Message, probably the Living Translation, there might be another paraphrase. Why do we have those, and what's their purpose if they know literal translation?
So the question is, what is the purpose of a paraphrase? Basically, they're there to give someone a good general picture of what the Bible is teaching, but to do it in a very simple and accessible format. So if you wanted just to read and get a rough idea of what the Bible's message is, then one of these paraphrases is a perfect place to start, like The Message or the New Living Translation. If you wanted to do a bit more nitty-gritty study, then you might want to read something like the English Standard Version or the NIV, which try to be much more literal translations. So that's really their purpose. What about the Amplified? Well, the Amplified Bible, I've never read it actually, but what I've been led to believe is, because words can have different connotations to them, sometimes the Amplified Bible, it will give you all the connotations of a word to help you get the fuller meaning. I've never actually read it myself, so I couldn't really tell you anything more about it than that, I'm afraid. The question was, is the Gideon's Bible easy to understand? I'd say, yeah, it's reasonably easy. I think it's a New International Version the Gideon's use, which is, it's a perfectly good Bible translation to use, yeah, that's fine. Sorry,
it's not, well, I don't think it's a question that's not when people look at Christianity, they don't necessarily look for their understanding of what is confusing. God is a loving God, right? He knows everything from the beginning. Why that's confusing? Because that means that he already knows what people are doing. Instantly, that baby is not necessarily on Jesus.
Okay, yeah. I mean, that's really addressing a different issue. What Mark was saying is that often when people don't pick up Bible verses and say, oh, these contradict themselves, they'll pick up more general themes like, well, if God is loving, why has he let this happen? And that's more about an understanding of God and who He is and everything like that. It's a slightly different issue, maybe a good topic for another Wetherspoons event. So you've got any more questions? Yeah. So, if I got your question right, okay, well, so you were saying that, is it true in part of the Bible is historical accounts that have a theological bent? The Bible actually contains different genres of literature, so you do have some historical accounts, historical narratives, you have some poetry, you have what they call wisdom literature, like the Proverbs, where it's sort of wise sayings, and you also have various other things like prophecies and the New Testament. Many of them are actually letters, many books in the New Testament are letters. So you have lots of different genres in the Bible, and the Old Testament histories, they are written to make theological points about God, about His dealing with people, but they are also historically accurate, archaeologically, they match up with what we know. But people often challenge that, but usually later research shows that the Bible was right all along. And so they do have that, and sometimes people can read it and maybe miss that point. But there are many study aids that can help you get to that point. And also, one of the reasons Christians meet to read the Bible together is because between them their collective wisdom helps them arrive at the right interpretation, whereas someone on their own might not necessarily get there. So, I'm not sure if that's helpful at all. So, have you got another question, Max?
Yeah, please. Some people told me that the book of Job is not actually a real event. It's more like a story told to illustrate something.
Right.
What is your opinion on that?
Yeah, I know some people will say that Job is like a parable, it wasn't a real person. I'm not sure what the reasons are for saying that. It's clear that Job is highly stylized, so when you have the conversation between Job and his friends, so as you don't know, Job is a story about a man who lost everything. His family died, all his wealth was taken from him, and it's about how he came to terms with that and how he's asking questions of God, like, why have you allowed this to happen to me? And in it he has discussions with his friends, and it's quite likely that the discussions have been not edited but kind of shortened and written in an accessible format. But there's no reason really to say he wasn't a real person. The people who say that, they're only proposing theory. There isn't any solid evidence to say no, he wasn't a real person.
There are Christians believe the Bible is complete, as I said. There are some other manuscripts that they don't know. Say build in part of the process. There are controversies on other books and other manuscripts of the life of them.
So what the question was is, Christians believe the Bible is complete, But then there are other manuscripts knocking around that other people say are competing views. So maybe the obvious example would be the Gnostic Gospels, which are a collection of writings that date from the year 2 to 300 AD, that often claim to give extra information about what Jesus really taught, and so they all claim secret knowledge. And so some people would say, well, why should we believe the Bible and not pay attention to these? When actually, when you look at the archaeological evidence and you look at the linguistic evidence, what we find is that the Gospels, we have fragments dating from very early, which give us confidence actually that they were written within the lifetime of the eyewitnesses, the events which they relate. And certainly the type of language used is language that would be around at that time. When it comes to the Gnostic Gospels, the language used shows evidence that they were written much later, maybe 200 or 300 years after Jesus' lifetime. And also, there aren't any, the fragments don't go back earlier than that, the manuscript fragments when they date them. So although there is competing ideas around, if you were to assess them, they actually are not as valid as the New Testament witness of Jesus, which dates back to pretty much the time it happened, compared to books written 200 or 300 years later. And if ever we want to know what's going on, we would always go to an earlier eyewitness source rather than someone's reflections written much later that says something quite radically different, if we were to want to know what happened. So, although these things do float around, I don't think they have the same authority as the Bible. But also, when Christians set down what they call a canon, they decided which books are part of the Bible and which aren't. The things that they looked for particularly were, well, who wrote it? And was it someone who was an eyewitness to Jesus' life and resurrection? And those were the decisions they made for deciding which books to accept or reject. And any book that they couldn't authenticate as being written by someone who was an eyewitness to events, they didn't include in the New Testament. So that's how we ended up with the books that we did. So, any more questions? Okay, well, great. I hope you found this evening helpful and interesting. Our next Wetherspoon evening is on the 15th of May. There are some flyers hanging around, and the actual subject is in the bottom corner, and it's, are Christians just hypocrites? Something you may have heard people say is the church is full of hypocrites, and we always seem to, periodically in news, will have some kind of child scandal or some financial irregularity, and it can give the impression that Christians, they're no better than anyone else. In fact, a lot of the time they're worse. So is there any reality to this? Can we really believe these people have had an encounter with God that has changed them? So that would be, those kind of issues we'll be exploring next time. Is, are Christians just religious hypocrites? Or are they people with a genuine life-changing message? So that would be on the 15th of May, and Ian will be the man to speak to if you'd like to come along to that. So thank you very much for listening.